Have you ever heard the sound of freedom? Have you ever heard the sound of freedom?
You're listening to The Flip Side with Noah Filipiak, connecting the reality of the gospel to the grit of life. You can support the podcast and pick up some sweet Flipside swag at www.patreon.com/Noah Filipiak.
What is up, Flipaponami? Welcome to episode 112 of the Flipside podcast. As you can probably already see, this episode is going to be a bit unique from other episodes. I want to start out by giving myself permission to just be a little raw on the podcast, a little maybe taking my time, maybe not quite as smooth. So just kind of be ready for that. I've already started this thing over 3 times, and I'm not going to do that again. I'm just going to let myself stammer and stutter if I need to. So you've already read the title of the episode, putting the podcast on pause, at least putting the long form episodes of the podcast on pause. And so the long form episodes are the interviews that I do, the hour plus episodes. I'm going to continue doing the 5-minute flips, and we'll talk about that, talk about why here in a moment. But essentially, and if you've been following the podcast for a long time, you know that here and there I will share about struggling with margin. I took a sabbatical from the podcast. I can't remember if that was last year or 2 years ago. And really it was for the same reason. What I'm going to share in this episode today is just my journey. I don't know how long this will take to talk through, but I'm going to tell you practically what's going on with the podcast and my life and things like that, career stuff, and then just some of my journey of learning rest and margin. And those are really important things that we talk about on the podcast a lot. We talk about burnout, and just did a sermon series at my church called Soul Rest this past fall. So just think of this as a continuation of all of those things. So this, I was reflecting Monday. I'm still going down to the river that I live near every Monday on my Sabbath, my day off, which has been really powerful. And I was reflecting on this word essential. What is essential? And for the last several years of my life with planting a church, I would say, what is essential is ministry impact. What is essential is seeing people come to know Jesus, the list of things that I was doing, that many of these I've already put a stop to. Some I thought were a pause and are going to be a stop. But throughout the last 3 years, was leading. We started an inner city park ministry that we ran for 2 summers, once a week. And I was volunteering weekly at the Boys and Girls Club and just doing everything I could to help our church grow, make an impact in our church neighborhood. I'm a person, as you know, from the podcast that cares about justice. I care about people that are hurting. I care about racism and inequity, and I care about many things. I care about the things that I hope I care about the things that God cares about. And I am good at starting things. I'm good at vision casting things and starting them and doing them. But then I start doing that with literally 10 things at a time. And what happens is picture planting, 10, could be vegetables in your garden. And all 10 vegetables they're competing for the same, maybe it's a potted plant. Maybe that's a good metaphor. And all 10 vegetables are competing for the same nutrients, the same soil. And what you end up happening is none of them thrive because there's not enough nutrients to go around. And that's what we do. That's what I've been doing when we don't honor our limits, our God-given limits, that we're human. And there's only so many things we can do. And when I try doing 10 things for a long time, none of those things end up thriving, like the vegetable growing and being fruitful. Everything kind of shrivels up and is emaciated and that sort of thing. And so this idea of what's essential is changing for me. Again, essential would also apply in that previous mindset of making an impact in ministry and people's lives changing, including writing books and doing the podcast. And these are all essentials. And then these are my highest priorities. I'm going to do these things. And what happens is when things actually are fruitful, it's even harder to stop the train. Because as they get fruitful, one, they go faster, so there's more demands on your time. There's more people to minister to, and there's more opportunities to do that ministry. And how can you stop any of it when what's essential is the fruit? What's essential is the ministry fruit and lives changing. And who could ever, you're a bad person if you would stop lives from changing. See the mindset there? You look at Jesus' life, and he didn't heal everyone. He took time away. He rested, and really his ministry as a whole was relatively small as far as his scope went. And I've been wrestling with these things for a long time. I think intentionally in discernment for at least a year and a half, where I knew I had to start pulling things away and working with my counselor on why I was this way and how to fix it. And it's really painful to stop things that you've started. It's really painful to say no. And so I've been making changes over the last year and a half. But not enough changes, really. And to be honest with you, where my pace of life is still very hectic and frantic. So I'll give you one example. I got home, as we did a Beyond the Battle retreat in Houston 2 weekends ago. Very, very fruitful. Again, lives changing, and it's fun. These are really good friends of mine, but it's a lot of work. I was up late multiple nights the week before, getting the retreat material finished, and there's certainly logistics that I work on for the retreat. And then I stayed an extra day in Houston. My wife's little brother lives down there, and that's another important relationship. And so instead of coming home Sunday after the retreat, I came home Monday, and I flew into Detroit, which is 3 hours away because I got a much cheaper ticket. Again, the retreat, it's part of my author life. I depend on that income. Up to this point, I'm about 3/4 time income at my church. And I've shared that here and there on the podcast as well. But so I fly from Detroit because it's much cheaper, and so I need to try to have this retreat actually produce income. So I get home at midnight because of that. On Monday, I fall asleep around 1 o'clock, and I wake up and I start a full week of work for church. And I've been gone 5 days, and prior to the 5 days, I was prepping for the retreat, right? So I'm doing that extra work. And then my Tuesday comes, which is my normal first day of the week. Monday is normally my Sabbath. I'm at the river. I'm resting. I didn't do that. I was flying. I was on a plane and then driving across the state. And Tuesday was really difficult for me. And I think that's really when I broke. And I don't say that in a bad way. I really say it in a good way. A break can be a good or a bad thing. And I praise God for this break. When I say I broke, what broke is that I finally have surrendered to God, and my essentials are changing. I think God, this long discernment process, when I say break, really is a breakthrough, but it's a surrendering. I always butcher this quote, but my friend Jason Redowdy, I interviewed Jason on episode 20 of this podcast, of The Flip Side. You can go find it, and I'll break this down after I say it, and I always butcher it. But Jason, in talking about addiction, and his story that he shares is about overcoming sexual addiction, and he talks about this line: when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of change, that's when we change. And so one of my addictions is this. It's workaholism, but it's not just any old workaholism. It's ministryaholism. I've shared a lot with you as listeners in the past about my insecurities around being seen as successful, the approval and affirmation pieces. And so there's a lot of striving around the podcast and the blog and the book sales and the numbers and metrics around that, including my church. And it's not that consciously I want these numbers because I'm egotistical. It's that I care about people and I want there to be impact. And I also want this sense that I'm influential, that I matter, in that sense. And that's just me being really vulnerable with you, right? And so that's part of that. That's part of that addiction. It's an approval addiction. There's a ministry addiction of really caring about people. And like I said, when you can be a part of changing lives, and the efforts you're doing are changing people's lives for eternity and changing their lives here and now, from how can you stop that? How can you say no to that? And so there's pain in staying the same for me. There's pain in the hectic, frantic pace that I go at all the time. And I never get my work done. And that's not a great feeling, to always have emails that you have to, reply to people to. And it's getting to a point where I've added some speaking engagements this year, which, it's great. Like I said, ministry is growing. We want that, especially as I lean into, I know I talked to you about Patreon and supplemental income, and I'm 3/4 time at the church. So if I get a speaking engagement, I have to take it, it feels like, right? And then I'm up till midnight prepping those talks. And I've noticed over the last few months, especially as that's amped up, I'm becoming the dad who's working all the time. I'm becoming the dad who's down in my basement office at home, till midnight, and the girls asking why I'm working all the time. Becoming the husband that's working all the time, and not only working all the time, but exhausted when I'm not working, and kind of just at a harried, stressed pace, because there's always more to be done. And I don't have the margin. Yes, I have my Sabbath. It's a lifesaver, but one day a week of rest is not a lifestyle of rest and margin. When you jump right back into it the next day, and you're more behind than you were, when you ended your work week. So that's what happened when I got home from the retreat. It was just this impossible amount of work to get done. It's still there. That amount of work is still there. And I just went, I can't do this anymore. And I praise God. It wasn't my choice. I would have chosen this a long time ago if I was able to choose it in a meaningful way. But finally, the pain of staying the same became greater than the pain of changing. So I'm changing. And so one of those changes is the podcast, of putting it on hold, call it a sabbatical again, call it a pause. I'll be continuing the 5-minute flips because those are short. There's no production. It's a very, very different process, completely different. I mean, a long-form episode takes hours and hours for all of it, the pre, the recording, the post. They also cost money for me to do. And then the 5-minute flips, the recording is just me recording and then publishing, because we're not, and we don't need to get into all of it, but there's just many steps that I'm not doing. So I want to continue those. I think they're important. It's an important ministry space for me. I want to stay connected to you as a listener. For those that are on Patreon right now, I would ask that you'd stay. And part of my 5-minute flips, I hope, help you feel like the podcast is still there and giving you content. And I'll get to more of that. But that's what's happening right now with the podcast, with this changing of what's essential. I've discerned for a long time, God, what am I called to? I do feel called to write books. I have 10 books in Evernote, probably more, of just piles of notes that Evernote's just a note app. And I have just piles and piles of notes. And I love that. I have these ideas and I put them down. And I really feel called to that. I feel called to this podcast. I feel called to writing and blogging and speaking. And I feel called to doing Beyond the Battle. our men's ministry with our groups and the retreats. Also feel called to pastoring Mosaic. I feel called to my church plant. And finally, I feel like I've come to a solution. When we'll see if it happens, if it works. Up to this point, I won't. I'll spare you the time of many things that I've already cut out. Some I've already shared in passing. There's many things I've already cut out, but the cycle continues. And so, as I've discerned these callings, the end of this discernment plan is recalibrating what is essential. And this is there's a discipleship, spiritual formation lesson in here that's really significant. When I say, like as Paul did, follow me as I follow Christ, what is it that I'm asking people to follow? And I did Ruth Haley Barton's 2-year Transforming Community back in 2015 to 2017. And one of the things Ruth says a lot is I'm paraphrasing, the greatest thing you can give to your ministry is your own transformed self. The greatest thing you can give to your people is your own transformed self. And if I'm giving the people in my church, or whoever it may be, the people watching me, if I'm giving them a self that is hectic and frantic, and with being frantic and hectic comes stress and irritability, task-oriented, because you have to get these things done to keep these things going, comes anxiety and depression. And certainly not all anxiety and depression is related to this type of thing, but this type of thing is going to increase your anxiety when you cannot get things done. And they're there, and there's pressure to get them done, and you just don't have enough energy and time to do it. And so when that's the me, this sort of hectic, harried, frantic me, and I'm saying, follow me as I follow Christ, that's not compelling. And effective ministry as someone who is a non-anxious presence, where Jesus is seen in them, and others can look and go, oh, how did they get that? How did they get that non-anxious presence? I want that. And that's my new essential. I wrote a rule for life in 2017 at the end of my Transforming Community experience. And I read it about a year ago and went, wow, this is wild to read this, because I'm not doing any of this. Like, I've completely relapsed into who I was before I started the Transforming Community, that 2-year cohort. And I gave myself grace on that, because, these things in us are wired into us. And it takes a lot of time to break addictions and to break these habits and patterns and to finally surrender things. But that was a wake-up call. And in that rule for life was about wanting to enjoy God, wanting to enjoy life. And I would add to that, and I interviewed Sean Nemechek about this. I can't remember the episode, probably in the 90s. And he talks a lot in his book, The Weary Leader's Guide to Burnout, about self-love, and self-love not in the sense of, kind of this selfish self-help sort of way, but if it's episode 101, if you want to reference that interview with Sean. But, and I've had others in my Beyond the Battle community share the same thing with me. How can I, preach to others and say to others, communicate to others that the pathway to our freedom, the pathway to being healed, is to know that we are loved by our Father through Jesus, that because of Jesus, we are fully loved when God looks at us. He sees Jesus' perfection, and we are his beloved children. We're his beloved sons and daughters because of the holiness of Jesus. And we don't have to do anything to earn that. We don't have to strive for it. And I can say that to others, but when I don't live like I'm worthy of love, so that's really what it comes down to. As ministers, we do that where everyone else is worthy of this love, so I will show it to them and pour it out to them. But in doing that to an extreme, I'm living in a way that would evidence that I don't believe I'm worthy of that love. Because if I was worthy of that love, then I could rest and do less and have margin, because that's what you would want for someone that is beloved. And there's a lot there. There's a lot there to being able to get to that deep layer of going, okay, do I believe Jesus really loves me in that way? Do I believe my Father really loves me in that way as his beloved Son? If yes, then I need to treat myself that way. I need to not abuse myself, because we don't abuse the ones we love. We don't abuse if someone who's worthy of love. We would cry out at the injustice of them being abused. Yet I'm abusing myself, and the collateral damage is starting to pile up. So I hope that gives you some context to where this kind of breaking point of going, all right, my new essential is not to change lives. My new essential is not to solve urban poverty, racial inequity. My new essential is not fill in the blank when it comes to ministry. My new essential is to live, to enjoy God. It's to enjoy God. It's to enjoy God so that when I point people to God, it's not pointing them to something that I'm not also experiencing myself. And this goes full circle back to the original point. The best thing you can give to the world, to your ministry, your people, is your own transformed self, so that other people's lives might change because they see the change in me, because they see what Jesus has done in me and the rest that I live in and the peace that I have and the calm that I have and the non-anxious presence that I am, because that became my essential. And then to let God do the work from there, flowing from living and working and ministering from a place of fullness where others can see the fullness and model their lives after that fullness, rather than living and working and ministering from a place of emptiness, because it's all been poured out, and in that emptiness, franticness, as I have described. And so, practically, I'm in a spot where I can't email people back. I have people waiting for me that I know I'm disappointing. They're disappointed in me, and I just literally can't do it. I don't have the time when I have the urgent, pressing needs in front of me. Most of which are in my church, running a 3-year-old church plant, and then the things that I add onto that plate. I can't do things like my taxes. There's things I have to do for my taxes that I just literally can't do. I do not have time to sit down and do them. Those of you that are on Patreon, we started our thing where I blog after each episode and communicate with you on your posts and ask you for questions about upcoming interviews. By the way, I meant to say this earlier. I did have an interview lined up for today. I mentioned it was on the Bible, and you could send your questions in about inerrancy and just kind of different things like that. That guest, I guess I don't know how to say it. That guest just wrote the wrong time down for the interview, and so we were gonna reschedule, and I shared with them with some of this, and after they didn't show for the interview, and we did some email exchanges, and they had the time wrong, and so just a heads up. If you were waiting on that interview, I asked if and when I come back from this to do the long form episodes again, we'll start back there, but that's where that went. But back to what I was saying with Patreon, asking you for your questions and all that communication, even that I'm at a point now these last 2 weeks where I just have not been able to do that. My episode with Michael Carrion, episode 111, I never got the blog post up, and I haven't responded to all the comments from the previous one, and I'm not going to live like that anymore, where everything I'm doing is suffering in quality and I'm letting people down on a consistent basis, or the things I'm doing with my church leadership are always last minute, And I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that type of leader or that type of person. So what is the plan? So the plan is I'm going to be raising financial support, fundraising through my Beyond the Battle nonprofit, Beyond Ministries. And I'm going to, my goal is to raise my full salary, essentially what I'm making at my church plant at Mosaic. I'm trying to raise that through Beyond Ministries. So I've made an appeal to our Beyond the Battle alumni that are active in our community to support, to give monthly, and I'll come back around to that. And I have others that I'm going to be making that appeal to. And what's the reason? What's the reason for trying to raise my full salary, the 3/4 that I'm making at Mosaic right now? That would be because what is needed, and this is not just what's needed pragmatically for Mosaic to get these jobs done, but also for me as I discern my gifting and as I discern my ADHD, which is a 5-minute flip that I'll do sometime soon about my diagnosis that I got about a year ago, and just coming to terms with the worsening symptoms of that. And what I'm good at and what really is difficult for me that is like easy and normal for other people. And my calling to do the creative space work that I can't do right now, that I feel like through discernment I'm supposed to do. And that I'm at peace with that there's nothing wrong with that. And so, in fact, there's a lot right with it, that God actually wants me to write these books and to do the speaking and the podcasting and things like that. So the solution is, see, our church plan is 3 years old, and I know some listening go to Mosaic, and I'll give you a little kind of context here as well. Our church plan is 3 years old. For those that don't know Mosaic, we're doing great. It's fantastic. We're growing at a great, slow kind of pace. We're very healthy, but there's around 80 regular attenders. Our church is a mixed demographic financially. We're in the inner city. We're intentionally there. We're intentionally diverse. And so there's just no way to hire another pastor full-time. We've made attempts to hire part-time pastors. It just doesn't work. That was the solution to this a year and a half ago. We looked at a residency, didn't work. Part-time associate pastor didn't work. It's very difficult to get anyone part-time whose pastor has the capacity time-wise, because they're already going to be working another job, and then the competency, pastorally, because those with the competency are looking for full-time, work with benefits and those sorts of things. So the solution that I'm discerning and attempting is to take hopefully my whole salary off the books at Mosaic, and I will stay as a pastor. For those attending Mosaic, they're listening. Nothing will change as far as what you see on the front cover of the Sunday morning. What will change is behind the scenes with the logistics of just running the church, and I don't need to get into all the details of what that entails. But I can tell you that's not my strength. And this breaking point has really helped me get to a point of going, yeah, it would be better to have someone doing that it is their strength. It's going to have to be someone full-time. And the only way we can afford that is for me to make $0 from the church right now. There's also some freedom in that where it's like, the load of running the organization truly would be on this other person. And I would be there leading in my gifts and doing many of the kind of public things that I'm doing now and the ways that I'm uniquely gifted and called, which I would continue to do. And so once that person was full-time at the church, and I don't know kind of what the title would be, figuring that out down the road. But the church budget would stay mostly the same because my dollars would be off the books. We'd use that to hire this person. And then, I don't know, I'm just saying 80%, maybe 80% of the behind the scenes logistical stuff that I do would go to this other person. And then I have margin. See where the margin comes from? Now I have margin to be faithful to my calling that I think God has given me, that in a way that's sustainable, and that's what this is about. And so the only way to get there is for me to raise what I make at the church, what I make at the church. And I can tell you again, I shared this with our Beyond the Battle guys. I'll just share it with you here to give you some ideas, just trying to be real with you. I have chosen to make $49,000 as my salary from the church, and salaries are relative. I work in a very diverse environment, and for some, I know $49,000 is more than you make listening, and for some, it's less. For some, I know it's considerably less, and for some, it might be considerably more. And it's debatable what should a pastor make and all those things. But I make $49,000 without any health insurance, because I get that through my wife. And so that's what I'm trying to raise. I'm trying to get that off the books at Mosaic. I'm trying to raise that. And so I've got that process started with our Beyond the Battle guys. But it is a task, and there's some other donors that I'll be talking to as well. It is a task. And as I talk to you as podcast listeners about Patreon, I've said, and I think it is easy with marketing speak to say something like, to make the podcast sustainable, give on Patreon. But this is truly, that's truly what it is. I mean, I am not sustainable right now. And not that I would make that salary from Patreon, but it is one of the income streams. And so it is one that, if you're listening and if you believe in the podcast, I would ask you, like I said, if you're already giving, to keep giving and to start giving. If you want to see the podcast back, if you want to see the long form episodes back. Honestly, I think this podcast is solid. I think the topics and the guests, it is the reality. It's the reality of the gospel meeting the grit of life. And the grit of life are things we don't talk about on Sundays that need to be talked about. I hope you find that to be a space for you, and it can be a space for others. But it can only be sustained. It can only come back if there's more financial support to do it. Particularly, as I said, I will be taking away all of my, if that's my hope, that's my goal. And maybe God has other plans, but my goal is to take away all of my my income from the church, so the church is fully free to hire this full-time person, this full-time worker, and to share the work with me there. And then I'll be back on the podcast, but only if the support is there. And that could be through Patreon. It could be through these other ways. But if you're a fan of the podcast and you want to see it back, I'd encourage you to give, and not just give to the podcast. I think that is, I listen to podcasts and I totally get it. Why would I pay for a podcast that's going to be free to me no matter what, if I pay or not? If I do my $5 or $10 a month and I've got my own budget to keep and I don't want that line item on my budget. And so I know this next episode's coming, whether I donate or not. So I'm not donating. Like, I get it. I would encourage you to think differently about support, whether whether or my giving link straight to the nonprofit. All the gifts are tax deductible because they get funneled through the umbrella of Beyond Ministries. But I would encourage you to think not just about Patreon as a podcast listener, as that sort of $5 to $10 a month, because to be honest with you, that really won't make a difference right now towards meeting this goal. Like, if you think about $49,000 as a goal, it would take, I don't know, off the top of my head, like 1,000 people to give $5 a month or something, right? Like, that would be, is that right? I don't know, something like that. Yeah, actually, that's not too bad. That's not too far off. Maybe like 4,000 people giving $5 a month. Let me tell you, 4,000 people do not listen to the flip side. So what I'm asking is, if you can give on Patreon, that's fantastic. and I always will appreciate that. And the goal there is to have listeners give their support. If you pile up enough listeners that it makes sort of a difference. But it is bigger than that. What I'm asking is if you see my body of work, if you've read Beyond the Battle, if you've read Needed Navigation, if you've read my blog, if you listen to these podcasts and you know me enough to know my heart, you know my approach, and you say, hey, I want more of that, like not just for me, but for the kingdom of God, for the world, that if you believe in my heart, my angle, my take on things, I would ask you to give. I'd ask you to give generously. And you can do that on Patreon. It's kind of just semantics. I think it's kind of psychological. Patreon is a way to support the podcast. There's $5 a month tier on there. The highest one I have is $50 a month tier. But when it comes to this support that I'm raising, $50 is the low end. That's the low end of the spectrum. So I'm really asking for support like a missionary would, to support what I'm doing with all of the things I mentioned, including the Beyond the Battle groups, to be able to continue those and grow those. And so the place you can donate is beyondthebattle.net/give, and you can set up a recurring gift there. It just, I think, feels weird if you were to give, let's say, $200 a month on Patreon. You certainly could do that. I do think there is a greater fee on Patreon than there is on beyondthebattle.net. So I might direct you there. So that's what I'm up to right now. I'm up to trying to get this support raised, and in the meantime, I'm not going to be podcasting long form episodes. I'm not going to be as robust in my Beyond the Battle involvement. I'll be pulling back there. I'll be focusing in on my church responsibilities because I have to. That is my primary responsibility, and that is that's my primary workload as well. The emails, the fires to be put out. I have a sermon series coming up. This Sunday. There's a lot of work to be done for it. Why am I recording this to you today? It's because this is part of the process. I was going to be recording this very soon after the interview today anyways, so I'm just doing it with that time I had blocked out in my calendar today. And so I guess my last word would be towards anyone from Mosaic listening. Why haven't I shared this with the church, et cetera? Well, it's because it's just very preliminary. I mean, if I don't get the money raised, nothing's going to change. I'm staying in my same role. Right now, I kind of see myself as the executive pastor, the teaching pastor, the lead pastor, or senior pastor, all in one. And I don't think that's healthy for any pastor, but that's just not what's even best for Mosaic. Our church will be much healthier, having someone that's kind of gifted more in the organizational side of things. I won't get into all the details, but just know that I'm very called to our church. I'm not going anywhere. I don't care where my income comes from. It's not like I'm going to care less if I'm not having an income from the church. And perhaps that isn't even possible. We'll see. I mean, a lot of this is just potential for down the road. But for me, when I say potential, it's stuff that we may have to, there'll be multiple variables down the road. Let's say if only half the money gets raised or whatever it may be. I just want to give you some peace that I am not going anywhere. I love our church. I would be lost without our church. Church-wise, I just love it. I love you. If you're a part of Mosaic, it is just so meaningful to me and such a place of healing and joy. And I can't wait, honestly, to be in a place, Lord willing, if this is His will in the sense of me discerning this, and I do think it is, that I get to that point that we can hire that second full-time pastor where I can enjoy Mosaic more. I can enjoy the people of my church more. I can have that margin and space for people as well, and to enjoy every day more, and to not feel bad about that, to not feel guilty about wanting to enjoy God and to enjoy life and to enjoy ministry, in those ways. So, so this is me sharing with you guys. I've always said we're a community, and so I'm wrapping this up. This is a good length for full episode 112, wrapping up here. If you are let me think here how to kind of close up shop. If you have questions about this and you're part of Mosaic, feel free to ask me. Like I said, nothing is changing, and even when I get this raised, if I get this raised, it'll be better for our church. And if you I will say with Podbean, I'm going to continue that line of communication going with, did I say Podbean? Too many P words. Patreon. If you join Patreon, if you want to be part of the podcast community, interacting with me, emailing me, talking through episodes, talking through this with me, sending me messages, it is going to be through Patreon. That's my boundary there. Kind of that paywall as a way of increasing support for the podcast and giving me one space where like podcast communication rests. So I'd encourage you to join Patreon for that reason. But as I mentioned, and perhaps you could give a small gift there and a larger gift over to beyondthebattle.net. But I'm asking you to support me and all of these things, and in a way, you're supporting Mosaic as well by giving. I'm really looking for recurring gifts only, as that is what helps with my budget and going, okay, I can do this. I can count on this for my income and career, and perhaps there will be a day when income like writing books and things like that take up a greater part of my income. Right now, I make almost zero on writing books, if you are wondering. I am not a rich and famous author by any stretch. And so that is not an income stream at all. And really neither is the podcast because of the overhead. So perhaps there will be a day when the podcast, Patreon, or the book sales will be at a pace that I wouldn't need as much donations. But for now, I'm asking you to donate to support me and my callings and these things. And yeah, if you're interested in donating, feel free to reach out to me, and if you have any questions about the logistics of it. So I am going to wrap things up here, and the 5-minute flips will continue. 5-minute flips will come. I don't know. I don't know how often they'll come, but they'll continue coming. So stay subscribed. If you're listening to this, say through my blog, and you're not actually subscribed to a feed, you need to go to Spotify, find the podcast, click subscribe. You need to go to Apple Podcasts, find the podcast, click subscribe. You have to type in The Flip Side with Noah Filipiak to find it. Subscribe there, and then you will get the 5-minute flips as they come out onto your podcast feed. So thanks so much. I'll just close by saying, pray. If you please pray for me. I am your brother in Christ. I am your friend to some degree. Some of you know me really well. Some of you are just listeners, but know that I care about you. And just pray that God would do His thing, and that one way or the other, this rest is happening, and I'm grateful for that. So yeah, thanks. I'm doing my recording the old-fashioned way here, and so I haven't done it this way in a long time. I'm not doing video. We're not doing editing after this, so I've got about 10 seconds here until the post edit or the outro comes in. So I just do want to say thanks for listening. Thanks for this journey, and I'll see you next time on The Flip Side.
Is a Beyond Ministries production. Copyright Noah Filipiak. www.noahfilipiak.com. Theme music by Kyle Lake at K-Lake Music. Used with permission. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.
It's time to bring me closer. There's no purgatory, 'cause you're in or you're out. When you see him in the clouds, you know it's going down.